Federal budgets are seen by some as opportunities to make changes, and some people are hoping that they come to Canada's tax system. It's overly complicated, critics say, too many tax credits that make it difficult for the average Canadian to take advantage. The big picture is here. Goldie Hyder, president of Hill & Knowlton Strategies. Bill Robson is president of the CEO of the C.D. Howe Institute, and Erin Weir is economist with the United Steelworkers. Great to have all of you here.
Thanks for having us.
Sure. Bill, let's start with what if you could get your hands on the tax code, where you would start. What is the most important thing to change, to simplify? We know they're overly complicated because they tend over time to be things layered on top of things. What would you do?
You want to first look at what the appropriate tax base is, and there are philosophical differences about that, but with the personal income tax, I think most people would say you want to be taxing people on their discretionary income. So things that are necessities, you deduct them, and then from there you figure out what rate structure you want on top of that.
Yeah.
In Canada, we're better than most countries, but still better does not mean good. And then once you've settled that, presuming you can, then it's all of these things that get layered on top of it as time goes by, and they accrete like barnacles on the hull of a ship. We want to get people to do this, we want to reward that. Yeah. And it is fiendishly complicated now. There's a marvelous document the Department of Finance puts out, 60 pages long, where you can get into this stuff. And I don't know if we're quite at the point yet in Canada where it's time for a thorough overhaul, because these things do tend to come in cycles. It might not be intolerable enough yet, but it sure is a problem for the average person.
Erin, $100 billion in tax expenditures, you know, credits for your kids' exercise classes, art classes, tools that workmen buy. You know, is this the time that we take a hard look at this? In the United States, it seems that all they're talking about is closing loopholes, ending these types of deductions to bring some financial sanity to the tax code.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with Bill that you want as broad a tax base as possible. We should look at eliminating some of these tax expenditures. One of the biggest tax expenditures is the fact that only half of capital gains are subject to personal or corporate income tax. Now, I acknowledge the fact that you need to make some adjustment for inflation. You probably can't just tax the nominal value of a capital gain, but do we really need to exempt half of all capital gains from tax? I would see that as one of the biggest and most costly tax expenditures that really favors people at the upper end of the income distribution who have a lot of investment income.
What do you expect, if anything, or is this simply as steady as it goes, no deficit by 2015, you know, the message we've been hearing for the last 2 years?
Well, I don't look for any radical changes, but staying on the theme of what might happen on the tax side, this is a bit of a policy wonk thing, but in the follow-up, they actually did something really important. They moved about $3.6 billion of tax expenditures from where they were invisible, being netted against revenue, to showing as program spending. And it's a cliche that what gets measured gets managed, but by putting some of those things there on the spending side, they made them a bit more exposed to the view. Parliamentarians can see them now in a way they couldn't before. So when it comes to some of the trimming that I know they're anxious to do in order to hit their targets, we might just see a bit more action as a result of the fact that we've got $3.6 billion of spending that before looked like a tax cut, but actually now is showing up where it ought to on the spending side of the ledger.
Erin, one of the big debates around this budget is surely going to be how much cutting should go on, how much kind of path back to balance, and how much we should be seeing job creation, spurring of growth. What's your view?
Well, we've seen some really troubling economic figures recently. It seems like the Canadian economy really slowed down towards the end of 2012. So I actually think that the government should be trying to propel growth and a recovery by investing in needed public services and infrastructure. I think it would be a big mistake to go too hard down the path of austerity, and we're seeing some examples of that in Europe right now. It can easily become a self-defeating strategy to cut too deeply, too fast.